Merrick Dahl thought he could strip it for salvage and get out before the walls started moving. That was weeks ago. Now the corridors shift when he's not looking, the air tastes like rust and rot, and something in the dark walks exactly when he does. How long can you survive when the ship itself is hunting you? I stopped counting days when the chronometer on my wrist began showing symbols I had never seen before. My name is Merrick Dahl, and I am a salvage clan scavenger born into the rust and ruin of the Cassian Reaches, where fortunes are pulled from the bones of dead ships and survival is measured in what you can carry before the void takes it back. I have crawled through engine decks that still hissed with radioactive steam, pried relics from altars whose gods had been silent for 10,000 years, and walked corridors where the air tasted of blood and incense mixed into something that made your teeth ache. I learned early that the galaxy is a graveyard, and we are the beetles picking through what remains. But I had never been inside anything like this. The space hulk that swallowed me was not simply a wreck. It was a migration, a living scar on reality that folded ships into itself like a predator curling around prey. When the warp surge came, it came without warning, a shudder that rippled through the bulkheads and turned every passage into a new configuration of steel and shadow. The compartments where my crew had gathered vanished behind walls that had not existed moments before. The exit hatch became a ceiling. The floor split into jagged teeth. And I was alone. That was weeks ago, though I cannot say how many. Time does not work correctly here. The hull creaks in rhythms that suggest breathing. The gravity shifts when you stop expecting it. Sometimes I walk for hours and return to corridors I swear I have never seen. Yet my boot prints are there in the dust, days old, circling back on themselves like the thoughts of something trying to remember what it used to be. I have learned not to trust my memory. I write nothing down because the ink changes when I am not looking. I speak aloud sometimes, just to hear a human voice. But the echoes return distorted, syllables stretched or reversed, and I have begun to suspect that something listens and tries to mimic the patterns without understanding what they mean. This place is not empty. It has never been empty. But what inhabits it does not reveal itself quickly. The hulk is composed of ships from a dozen eras, perhaps more. I have walked through Imperial frigates with their devotional murals still intact, the Emperor's face watching from walls scorched black by plasma fire. I have crawled beneath Mechanicus bulkheads, where servitors hang from cables like puppets whose strings were cut mid-performance, their augmetics still twitching in response to commands transmitted from cogitators that no longer exist. I have found Xenos architecture, geometries that hurt to perceive, chambers where the corners multiply when you try to count them, and doorways that open onto themselves in recursive spirals. The ships do not simply collide here, they fuse. Metal flows into metal, decks merge and split. What was once a transport bay becomes a chapel, becomes a holding cell, becomes something that defies both function and name. And through it all, the hulk drifts, propelled by forces I cannot see, traveling routes that no cartographer would recognize. I carry what I can, a las pistol with half a charge. A rebreather that filters the worst of the air but does nothing for the smell, which is everywhere. A mixture of corroded iron, spoiled organics, and something sweeter, like incense left burning too long in a closed room. I have a blade, short and broad, the kind used for prying open crates and cutting through cabling. I have a glow rod that flickers when the temperature drops, which it does without pattern or reason. I wear the same environment suit I entered with, its seals cracked, its lining stiff with dried sweat and older stains I do not examine closely. My clan tattoos, inked across my forearms in the old mercantile script, have begun to fade from exposure to whatever radiation leaks through the walls here. I do not know if I will live long enough for them to disappear entirely, but I think about it often. The first days were spent searching for an exit. I moved methodically, mapping routes in my head, marking junctions with scratches on the walls. I believed that if I could find a cargo bay or a hangar, I might signal for retrieval, or at least locate a functional voidcraft and attempt a manual launch. I believed I could impose order on this place. I believed many things, The Hulk taught me otherwise. I would climb a stairwell and emerge 3 decks below where I started. I would follow a corridor that bent left and find myself walking in the opposite direction without ever turning around. Doorways sealed themselves behind me. Passages I had walked 100 times vanished, replaced by walls that bore no weld marks, no seams, nothing to suggest they had ever been anything but solid. I began to understand that the Hulk does not permit navigation, it permits wandering, and wandering is all I have left. Hunger came slowly at first. I found ration packs in lockers, most of them spoiled, but some still edible if I could ignore the texture and the aftertaste that lingered for hours. I found water in condensation tanks, in broken pipes that dripped into pools filmed with algae or oil or something that might have been either. I filtered what I could and drank what remained. My body adapted. I grew leaner. My thoughts sharpened in some ways and dulled in others. I learned to ignore the cramps, the dizziness, the way my hands trembled when I tried to hold the glow rod steady. Hunger is survivable. Thirst is survivable. What breaks you is the waiting. The certainty that nothing will change. That you will walk these corridors until your legs give out, and then you will crawl, and then you will stop, and the Hulk will fold around you like a cocoon, and in 1,000 years some other scavenger will find your bones and wonder who you were and whether you screamed at the end. I found the first shrine on the 9th day, or what I believed was the 9th day. It was tucked into an alcove off a main passage, a small space no larger than a storage closet, its walls covered in hand-painted icons of the god emperor. The style was crude but fervent, each brushstroke applied with the kind of care that suggests desperation. Candles had been placed on a makeshift altar, their wax pooled and hardened into shapes that resembled hands or faces depending on the angle of the light. Someone had knelt here, someone had prayed. I found their remains nearby, still in the kneeling position, their spine curved forward as if they had fallen asleep mid-devotion and never woken. The body was mummified, the skin drawn tight over the bones, the jaw hanging open in an expression that might have been peace or horror. I could not tell. I did not stay long. But I thought about them often afterward. I thought about how long they had prayed before they realized no one was listening. I thought about whether they had died believing or whether faith had abandoned them first. The second shrine was different. I found it in what had once been a mess hall, long tables still bolted to the floor, benches overturned, trays scattered like leaves. The walls here were covered in writings, not devotional, but frantic, scrawled in a dozen languages and scripts, some of which I recognized and others that looked like they had been invented on the spot. They spoke of voices in the walls, of shadows that moved against the light, of hunger that could not be sated no matter how much you consumed. They spoke of a presence that watched and waited and never revealed itself fully. The writings ended abruptly, mid-sentence, the final words trailing off into a smear as if the writer's hand had been pulled away while the ink was still wet. I searched the room but found no body. I found only boot prints in the dust, leading toward a sealed bulkhead, and scratches on the metal as if someone had clawed at it trying to escape or trying to get in. I began to hear things, footsteps that matched my own rhythm, always half a second behind, breathing that was not my own, slow and deliberate, coming from ducts and vents that should have been empty. Voices, distant and indistinct, calling names I did not recognize. I told myself it was acoustics, the way sound travels strangely through metal and confined spaces. I told myself it was my mind compensating for the silence, generating stimuli to fill the void. I told myself many things. But I started walking more quietly, I started checking behind me more often, and I stopped speaking aloud because the echoes had begun to answer. The Hulk revealed its nature gradually, like a predator testing its prey. The gravity shifts became more frequent. I would be walking upright, and then suddenly the floor would tilt, and I would find myself clinging to what had been a wall, my stomach lurching, my vision swimming. Sometimes the shifts were gentle, a slow rotation that allowed me to adjust. Other times they were violent, slamming me into bulkheads or sending me tumbling through passages that had become vertical shafts. I learned to recognize the signs. A faint vibration in the deck, a change in air pressure, a sound like metal groaning under immense strain. When I felt these things, I braced myself, but the Hulk learned too. It began to shift without warning. It began to shift in ways that defied physics, pulling me in directions that should not exist, folding space around me until I could not tell up from down or forward from back. I vomited more than once, my body rebelling against sensations it was never designed to process. And each time, when the world finally stabilized, I was somewhere new, somewhere I had never been, and the route back was gone. I found the Vox logs in a communications room buried deep in what I believed was the lower decks, though lower and upper had become meaningless concepts. The room was small, its equipment ancient, rows of cogitators and data slates coated in dust so thick it looked like fur. I wiped one clean and activated it, expecting nothing, but the screen flickered to life, and a voice began to play. It was a woman's voice, calm at first, methodical, recording her observations as she explored the Hulk. She spoke of finding supplies, of mapping routes, of maintaining discipline and routine. She spoke of hope. The logs progressed. Days turned into weeks. Her voice changed. The calm gave way to frustration, then fear, then something colder, a detachment that sounded like she was narrating events happening to someone else. She spoke of losing track of time, of forgetting why she had started recording in the first place, of hearing things that should not be there. The final log was brief. She said only that she understood now, that the Hulk did not want her dead, it wanted her to forget. And then the recording ended, not with a scream, but with silence, and I sat in that dark room and realized I had been holding my breath. I tried to retrace her steps. The logs contained references to landmarks, to specific corridors and chambers, and I thought that if I could follow her path, I might find something she had missed, some detail that would explain how to survive or how to escape. But the landmarks did not exist. The corridors she described were not where she said they would be. The chambers had different dimensions, different configurations. I realized that the Hulk she had explored was not the same Hulk I was in, even though we were both inside the same drifting mass. The ship changes, it reconfigures itself. What is true one day is false the next. And I began to wonder if the woman in the logs was still here, somewhere, walking corridors that no longer connected to mine, recording observations that would never be heard, living and dying in a version of this place that existed parallel to my own but would never touch it. The hunger grew worse. I found fewer supplies. The lockers I opened were empty or filled with things that had rotted beyond recognition. I ate what I could, things I would never have considered food under any other circumstance. I chewed on dried fungus scraped from walls. I sucked moisture from insulation foam. I cracked open nutrient tubes meant for servitors and swallowed the paste inside, which tasted like oil and metal and burned my throat on the way down. My body protested. I developed sores in my mouth. My gums bled. My stomach cramped constantly, a dull ache that never fully subsided. But I kept moving. Movement was the only thing that felt like purpose. If I stopped, if I allowed myself to rest for too long, I feared I would never stand again. The claw marks appeared in clusters. I found them on walls, on floors, on the undersides of overhangs where no human hand should have been able to reach. They were deep, gouged into the metal with enough force to leave burrs and shavings scattered around them. Some were fresh, the edges sharp, the metal gleaming where it had been exposed. Others were old, rusted, filled with grime and organic matter that might have been blood or might have been something else. I tried to determine what had made them. The spacing suggested something with 4 or 5 digits. The depth suggested immense strength. The patterns suggested panic. I found them near doorways, as if something had tried to claw its way through. I found them in long scratches down the centers of corridors, as if something had dragged itself forward using only its hands. I found them in circles, spiraling inward, as if something had spun in place, carving the metal in a frenzy. And I found them leading toward areas I had not yet explored, and I followed them because I had no better plan, and because I needed to know what had made them, even though I suspected that knowing would not help me. The temperature fluctuated wildly. I walked through sections where frost coated every surface, where my breath fogged and my fingers went numb inside my gloves. I walked through sections where the heat was so intense that my suit's seals threatened to fail, where sweat poured down my face and my vision blurred, and I had to move quickly before I collapsed. There was no pattern, no warning. I would step through a doorway and the temperature would drop 30 degrees in an instant. I would climb a ladder and emerge into air so hot it seared my lungs. My body could not adjust. I developed chills that lasted for hours. I developed fevers that left me delirious, muttering to myself, seeing shapes in the shadows that were not there, or perhaps they were there. I could no longer trust my senses. The Hulk taught me that perception is not reality, and reality here is whatever the ship decides it will be. I found a garden. It should not have existed, but there it was, a vast chamber filled with vegetation that grew in defiance of logic. The plants were twisted, their stems spiraling in geometries that hurt to follow, their leaves a sickly yellow-green that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. The air smelled sweet and rotten, like fruit left to decay in the sun. I walked between the rows, careful not to touch anything, and I saw that the plants were not rooted in soil but in something else, a black, fibrous material that pulsed rhythmically as if it were breathing. I knelt and touched it, and it was warm, and it recoiled from my hand, contracting like living tissue. I jerked back and stood, my heart pounding, and I realized that the garden was not growing. It was being grown. Something was cultivating this place, something was feeding it, and I did not want to meet whatever that something was. The servitors I encountered were not functional, or at least not in any way I understood. They hung from cables, as I had seen before, but some of them moved, their limbs twitching in slow, deliberate patterns, as if they were attempting to perform tasks that no longer had meaning. One reached toward me as I passed, its hand opening and closing, its ocular implants dark and dead. I stopped and watched it for a long time, trying to determine if it was aware of me or simply repeating a programmed routine. It gave no sign of recognition. It only reached over and over toward empty air, and after a while I continued walking because there was nothing I could do for it and nothing it could do for me, but I thought about it often afterward. I thought about what it meant to continue performing a function long after the purpose had been forgotten. I thought about whether I was any different. I began to lose track of myself. I would find myself standing in a corridor with no memory of how I had arrived. I would discover injuries on my body, cuts and bruises, and have no recollection of receiving them. I would wake from sleep I did not remember falling into, my hands clutching objects I had not picked up. My thoughts became fragmented. I would start a sentence and forget the end. I would plan a route and then take a different one without realizing. I began to suspect that time was not passing linearly, that I was experiencing moments out of sequence, that the Hulk was not simply trapping me in space but in some kind of temporal loop or distortion. Or perhaps my mind was simply breaking. Perhaps this is what happens when you spend too long alone in the dark, when every day is identical and every hope is extinguished. Perhaps madness is not a descent, but a quiet unraveling, so gradual that you do not notice until there is nothing left to hold together. The prayers I found were carved into walls, scratched into floors, written in substances I did not want to identify. They were not all imperial. Some were addressed to gods I had never heard of. Gods with names that sounded like they had been pulled from nightmares. Gods of hunger and silence and forgetting. Some were addressed to the Hulk itself, begging it for mercy, for release, for understanding. Some were curses, vicious and profane, damning the Emperor, damning the Imperium, damning fate and fortune and everything that had led the writer to this place. I read them all. I read them because they were proof that others had been here, that I was not the first, and perhaps that meant I would not be the last. But the comfort was thin, because every prayer ended the same way, with silence, with absence, with the certainty that no answer would ever come. I saw movement once. It was distant, At the far end of a long corridor, a shape that passed across a junction and disappeared. I called out, my voice hoarse, cracking, and the echo returned, but nothing else. I ran toward it, my legs weak, my breath ragged, and when I reached the junction there was nothing. No footprints, no sign that anything had been there, but I had seen it, I was certain. Or perhaps I was not certain. Perhaps my mind had conjured it, a phantom born from desperation and solitude. But I wanted to believe. I needed to believe that I was not alone, even if what I shared this place with was something I would never want to meet. The days blurred. I walked, I searched, I ate when I could, I drank when I could. I rested in corners and alcoves, my back against walls, my last pistol in my hand, my eyes open because closing them invited dreams I could not bear. I dreamed of home, of the salvage clan hab blocks where I had grown up, of my mother's voice singing old work songs while she sorted scrap, of my father teaching me how to read imperial script by candlelight because the power cells were too valuable to waste. I dreamed of my first salvage run, the thrill of pulling a relic from the wreckage, the weight of it in my hands, the knowledge that I had claimed something from the void and made it mine. I dreamed of things I had lost, and things I had never had, and things I would never have again. And when I woke, the dreams clung to me, and I had to remind myself where I was and what I had become. I found a body that was recent, or relatively recent. The decay was not as advanced as the others. The skin still had color, though it was mottled and bruised. The eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, clouded but not yet empty. I knelt beside it and searched for identification, for anything that might tell me who this person had been. I found a data slate in their pocket, but it was cracked, its screen dark, and when I tried to activate it, nothing happened. I found a pendant around their neck, a simple thing, a circle of tarnished silver with a name engraved on the back. I could not read the script. I left the pendant where it was. I closed the eyes, though I did not know why, though it would make no difference, and I moved on because staying would not change what had happened and would not prevent what would happen to me. The architecture grew stranger the deeper I went, or perhaps not deeper but further from wherever I had started. I entered chambers where the walls curved in ways that defied geometry, where walking straight ahead somehow brought me back to where I had begun. I climbed stairs that spiraled endlessly, neither ascending nor descending, existing in a loop that had no exit. I found rooms filled with water, clear and still, with no visible source and no drain, the surface reflecting a ceiling I could not see. I found rooms that were too large, their dimensions impossible, their far walls so distant that my glow rod could not reach them. I found rooms that were too small, cramped spaces that seemed to compress as I entered, forcing me to crawl and then to squeeze and then to retreat before the walls closed entirely. The hulk was not built. It was grown, accumulated, layered over itself like scar tissue forming over a wound that refuses to heal. I began to talk to myself more often. Not out loud, but in my head, a constant stream of narration describing what I saw, what I felt, what I planned to do next. It helped. It gave structure to the chaos. It reminded me that I still existed, that I was still capable of thought, of observation, of intent. But the narration began to change. I started hearing it in a voice that was not my own, a voice that was calmer, more detached, as if someone else were describing my actions from a distance. I tried to stop, to silence the voice, but it continued, and I realized it was not something I was doing. It was something that was being done to me. The hulk was narrating me. It was watching and recording and interpreting, and I was simply an event occurring within its vastness, no more significant than a flicker of light or a drop of condensation sliding down a wall. The isolation was worse than the hunger, worse than the fear, worse than the certainty that I would die here. I had believed I was strong. I had survived the harshest training the salvage clans could devise. I had walked through derelicts that would have broken lesser souls. I had endured pain and loss and the kind of grinding poverty that strips away everything but the will to continue. But none of that prepared me for this, for the absence of purpose, for the knowledge that nothing I did mattered, that the Hulk would drift regardless of whether I lived or died, that my struggles were invisible to the universe, that my existence had become so small and so meaningless that even my death would not register as an event worth noting. I found a map once, drawn on a wall in faded ink, showing a network of corridors and chambers with labels in a language I recognized but could not read fluently. I followed it as best I could, hoping it would lead somewhere, anywhere, that might offer safety or supplies or simply a change of scenery. It led me in circles. The corridors did not match. The chambers were in the wrong places, the distances were incorrect. I realized the map was not wrong. The Hulk had changed since the map was drawn, and I wondered how long ago that had been. Days? Years? Millennia? Time is fluid here. The past and present bleed into each other, and the future is a concept that has lost all meaning. I began to leave marks of my own, scratches on walls, boot prints in dust, small cairns of debris stacked in doorways. I told myself it was practical, a way to track where I had been, to avoid retracing my steps. But the marks disappeared. I would return to a corridor I had marked hours earlier, and the scratches would be gone, the dust undisturbed, the cairns scattered or removed entirely. The Hulk was erasing me. It was consuming the evidence of my passage, ensuring that I left no trace, no legacy, no proof that I had ever existed. And I understood then what the woman in the Vox logs had meant when she said the Hulk did not want her dead. It wanted her forgotten. It wanted to erase her so completely that even her memory would vanish, leaving nothing behind but empty space. The air quality worsened. My rebreather struggled to filter the worst of it, and I began to cough, a deep, wet sound that echoed through the corridors and made my chest ache. I coughed up blood once, bright red against the back of my hand, and I stared at it for a long time, trying to determine what it meant, whether it was a symptom of something serious or simply the result of breathing toxic air for too long. I could not tell. I had no medical training. I had no equipment to diagnose myself. I could only continue and hope that my body would adapt or that I would find cleaner air before it became critical. I found a shrine that was still active. Candles burned, their flames steady despite the absence of air circulation. Incense smoldered, filling the chamber with smoke that was thick and cloying and made my eyes water. The altar was covered in offerings, small objects arranged with care, coins and trinkets and scraps of fabric, each one placed by hands that believed it mattered. I approached slowly, expecting to find a body, a priest or devotee who had remained to tend the shrine even as the Hulk consumed everything around them. But there was no one. The shrine tended itself. The candles burned without wicks, the incense renewed without intervention. And I realized that this place had been claimed by something, sanctified in a way that went beyond human ritual, and I backed away slowly because I did not want to disturb whatever force maintained it. The hallucinations began shortly after. Or perhaps they had always been there, and I had simply stopped recognizing them as such. I saw figures in the distance, shapes that moved with purpose, that seemed to be walking toward destinations I could not perceive. I saw lights that drifted through walls, orbs of pale luminescence that left trails in the air like afterimages. I saw text that was not there, words written across surfaces in scripts that shifted and changed as I tried to read them. I saw my own face reflected in surfaces that should not have been reflective, and the face was not mine, or not entirely mine, as if I were looking at someone who resembled me but had lived a different life and made different choices. I stopped trusting my eyes. I stopped trusting my ears. I stopped trusting anything except the weight of the deck beneath my feet, and even that was uncertain. The sound of my own footsteps became unbearable. Each step echoed, bouncing off walls and ceilings and floors, amplified and distorted until it sounded like a crowd walking beside me, behind me, all around me. I tried walking more softly, placing my feet with care, but the echoes remained. I tried stopping, standing perfectly still, holding my breath, and the footsteps continued, as if something else were moving in sync with me, matching my rhythm, waiting for me to resume before it would stop. I ran once, sprinting down a corridor. and the footsteps multiplied, a stampede of sound that chased me until I collapsed, gasping, my lungs burning, and only then did the echoes fade, leaving me alone in the silence that was somehow worse. I discovered sections of the hulk that were still powered. Lights flickered in corridors that should have been dark. Cogitators hummed in rooms that should have been silent. Doors opened and closed on automated schedules, admitting no one, sealing nothing. I tried to access the systems, to pull data, to send a signal, but the interfaces were locked or corrupted or simply incomprehensible. The machine spirits here were broken, or perhaps they had never been whole. Fragments of programming cobbled together from ships that had been destroyed and absorbed and repurposed into something that no longer resembled the sum of its parts. I spoke to them anyway. I whispered prayers and commands and pleas, hoping that some fragment of intelligence remained, that something might respond. But there was only silence, or worse, static that sounded almost like laughter. I found a viewport once, a wide expanse of reinforced glass looking out into the void. I pressed my face against it, desperate to see something, anything, beyond the confines of the hulk. The stars were wrong. They did not match any constellation I knew. They did not move as stars should, drifting across the field of view in patterns that suggested the hulk was tumbling or spinning or both. And between the stars, I saw shapes, vast, indistinct things that moved through the void like shadows cast by no light. I watched them for a long time, trying to understand what they were, whether they were ships or creatures or something else entirely. But the glass fogged with my breath, and when I wiped it clear, the shapes were gone, and I could not tell if they had moved away or if they had never been there at all. The weight of time pressed down on me. I had been inside the hulk for weeks, perhaps months. My body was failing. My muscles had atrophied. My skin hung loose over bones that felt too sharp, too prominent. My hair had grown long and matted, filled with grime and sweat and things I did not want to identify. My beard itched constantly, and I scratched at it until my face bled, and then I stopped because the blood would not clot properly and I could not afford to lose any more fluids. I looked at my hands and did not recognize them. They were the hands of a corpse, pale and skeletal, the veins standing out like cords, the nails cracked and blackened. These were not my hands, but they moved when I commanded them. They held the las pistol, they gripped the blade. They were all I had. I began to wonder what would happen if I simply stopped. If I sat down in a corridor and closed my eyes and refused to stand again. Would the hulk allow it? Would it let me die peacefully? Or would it intervene, dragging me forward, forcing me to continue because my suffering was more valuable than my death? I did not test the hypothesis. I was too afraid of the answer. And so I kept walking. Because walking was movement and movement was life. And as long as I moved, I could pretend that I still had purpose, that I was still searching for something. That escape was possible even though I knew it was not. The sounds grew louder. Groans and screeches and impacts that shook the deck beneath my feet. I felt vibrations through the walls, rhythmic and deliberate, as if something massive were moving through the hulk, dragging itself along surfaces, its bulk scraping against metal. I followed the vibrations, driven by a curiosity I could not explain, and I found myself in a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness, its floor covered in debris and organic matter that squelched beneath my boots. The air was thick with a smell I had encountered before but could not place, something primal and wrong. And in the center of the chamber, I saw movement, something large, something that shifted and pulsed, something that might have been alive, or might have been a machine, or might have been both. I could not see it clearly. My glow rod was too weak, and the shadows were too deep. But I felt its presence. I felt it watching me, and I turned and fled, stumbling over debris, my breath coming in gasps, and I did not stop until I had put several corridors between myself and that place, and even then I felt its gaze on my back. I found more Vox logs scattered through different terminals, different voices, different languages. They all told the same story: arrival, hope, decline, despair, acceptance, silence, Some logs ended with prayers, some ended with screams, some ended mid-word, as if the speaker had been interrupted or had simply lost the will to continue. I listened to them all. I absorbed their warnings, their observations, their final thoughts, and I realized that I was following the same trajectory, that I was walking the same path, that the Hulk had done this before many times and would do it again. And that knowledge should have broken me, but instead, it gave me a strange kind of peace. Because if this was inevitable, if escape was impossible, then I was no longer responsible for trying. I could simply exist. I could endure. And perhaps that was enough. The Hulk began to feel familiar. I recognized corridors not because I had mapped them, but because I had walked them so many times that they had become part of me. I knew which sections were hot and which were cold. I knew where to find water, where to find food, where to find places to rest that were relatively safe. I developed routines. I woke at irregular intervals and walked for what felt like hours, and then rested, and then woke and walked again. I checked my las pistol, though I had not fired it in what felt like weeks. I sharpened my blade, though I had not used it for anything but prying open containers. I maintained the rituals of survival, even though they no longer served a function beyond giving me something to do. I began to talk to the Hulk, not as if it were alive, but as if it were listening. I described my day, my observations, my thoughts. I asked it questions, knowing it would not answer. I cursed it, praised it, begged it for mercy. And sometimes, I swear, it responded. Not with words, but with changes. A door that had been sealed would open. A passage that had been blocked would clear. A cache of supplies would appear in a place I had searched a dozen times before. I could not tell if this was coincidence or intent, whether the Hulk was responding to my pleas or simply continuing its endless reconfiguration regardless of my presence. But I chose to believe it heard me, because the alternative was to accept that I was speaking into a void that did not care, and that acceptance would have been the end of me. The dreams became more vivid. I dreamed I was outside the Hulk, floating in the void, watching it drift past, a massive, tangled mass of ships and debris held together by forces I could not comprehend. I dreamed I was inside one of the fused ships, watching as the walls melted and reformed, as corridors twisted and merged, as the Hulk consumed and integrated and became something new. I dreamed I was someone else, one of the countless souls who had died here, and I saw the Hulk through their eyes, experienced their fear and their hope and their slow descent into madness. And when I woke, I could not tell which memories were mine and which belonged to the dead. I could not tell where I ended and they began. I found a control room that still functioned, its screens displaying data I could not fully interpret. Star charts that showed no recognizable systems. Logs of ships that had been absorbed, their names and classifications listed in neat columns that scrolled endlessly. Power readings that spiked and dropped without pattern. I sat in the command chair, its leather cracked and stiff, and I stared at the screens and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. And slowly, over hours or days, I began to understand. The Hulk was not drifting. It was traveling. It moved through the warp, through real space, through dimensions I had no name for. It had a trajectory, a destination, though what that destination was I could not determine. And I realized that I was not trapped. I was a passenger. The Hulk was taking me somewhere, and I would arrive, whether I wanted to or not. The revelation did not comfort me. If anything, it made the situation worse. Because if the Hulk had a destination, then it also had a purpose, and that purpose almost certainly did not include my survival. I was cargo. I was fuel. I was something to be consumed, integrated, absorbed into the mass of the Hulk, my identity dissolved, my existence erased, and there was nothing I could do to prevent it. I could not steer the Hulk. I could not stop it. I could not even slow it down. I was utterly powerless, and that powerlessness was more terrifying than any monster I might encounter. I stopped looking for exits. I stopped planning escape routes. I stopped maintaining the fiction that I would survive this. Instead, I focused on smaller goals. Finding food, finding water, finding places to rest. I reduced my existence to its most basic components, stripping away hope and ambition and all the things that had once defined me. I became an animal, driven by instinct, reacting to immediate needs, living moment to moment without thought for the future. And in that simplicity, I found a kind of clarity. The Hulk could not break me if there was nothing left to break. The isolation could not crush me if I had already let go of everything I had been holding on to. I saw myself in a reflection once, in a polished section of wall, and I did not recognize the face staring back. It was gaunt, hollow-eyed, the skin pulled tight over the skull, the expression vacant and haunted. This was not Merrick Dahl. This was something else, something that had been Merrick once, but had been worn down and reshaped by the Hulk until only the barest outline remained. I touched the reflection, my fingers leaving smudges on the metal, and the face did not react. It simply stared, empty and accusing, and I turned away because I could not bear to look at what I had become. The passages grew narrower. I crawled more often than I walked, squeezing through gaps that seemed designed to hinder rather than facilitate movement. My suit tore, my skin scraped against rough edges. I bled, and the blood left trails behind me, dark stains on the metal that might have served as markers if I ever came this way again. But I would not come this way again. The Hulk ensured that I never walked the same route twice. It forced me forward, deeper into its interior, toward whatever awaited me in the depths. I found a chamber filled with bones. Human bones, Xenos bones, bones I could not identify. They were piled high, reaching almost to the ceiling, a monument to all the lives the Hulk had claimed. I walked through them, my boots crunching on fragments, and I felt nothing. No horror, no grief, no fear. The bones were simply objects, remnants of flesh that had once moved and thought and felt, but no longer did. They were no different from the debris scattered throughout the Hulk, no more significant than a broken chair or a discarded tool. And I realized I had lost something essential, some capacity for empathy or compassion or basic human decency. The Hulk had stripped it away, leaving only survival, only the animal drive to continue existing regardless of cost. The light from my glow rod began to fail. It flickered more often, dimming and brightening in irregular patterns, and I knew it would not last much longer. I considered conserving it, using it only when absolutely necessary. But the darkness here was absolute, and without light I would be blind, helpless, easy prey for whatever inhabited this place. So I kept it on, and I watched as the battery drained, and I accepted that soon I would be walking in darkness, feeling my way forward, trusting senses I could no longer rely on. I heard singing once, a soft, melodic sound, distant but clear, carrying through the corridors like a thread of light cutting through shadow. I followed it, compelled by a longing I could not name, and I walked for what felt like hours, the song always ahead of me, always just out of reach. And then it stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before, and I stood in a corridor that looked like every other corridor. And I realized the song had been leading me nowhere, or perhaps leading me exactly where the Hulk wanted me to go. The final shrine I found was different from the others. It was not Imperial, it was not Xenos, it was something else, something that predated categories and classifications. The altar was simple, a flat stone placed on the floor, and on it sat a single object, a sphere of dark glass or crystal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I knelt before it, my body protesting, and I stared into the sphere, and I saw things I cannot describe, images that were not images, concepts that were not concepts, truths that were not truths. I saw the Hulk as it truly was, not a collection of ships, but a living thing, a consciousness that spanned dimensions, that existed in multiple states simultaneously, that fed on suffering and memory and the slow erosion of hope. I saw myself as the Hulk saw me, a mote of light flickering briefly before being extinguished, insignificant and forgettable, and I saw what I would become, not bones in a pile, but something worse, something integrated into the Hulk's structure, my thoughts and memories absorbed, my identity dissolved, my existence continuing not as Merrick Dahl, but as part of the vast, indifferent whole. I stood and walked away from the shrine, and the knowledge I had gained did not bring clarity or peace. It brought only acceptance. The Hulk had won. It had always been going to win. And I was simply one more soul in an endless procession, walking toward the same inevitable conclusion. The glow rod died. The light flickered one final time and then went out, plunging me into darkness so complete that I could not see my hand in front of my face. I stood still, waiting for my eyes to adjust, but there was nothing to adjust to. No ambient light, no glow from distant systems, nothing. I was blind, and in the blindness, I felt the Hulk more clearly than I ever had. I felt its presence surrounding me, pressing in from all sides, a weight that was not physical but was no less real. I felt it breathing. I felt it thinking. I felt it aware of me in a way that was neither hostile nor benign, simply observational, as if I were an insect caught in a jar, and it was a child watching to see how long I would survive. I walked in the darkness. I trailed my hand along the wall, using it to guide me, feeling the texture of the metal, the seams and rivets and imperfections. I walked until I could no longer tell if I was walking or standing still, if I was moving forward or in circles. The darkness was disorienting, all-consuming, and I began to lose my sense of direction, my sense of self. I was no longer Merrick Dahl. I was no longer anything. I was simply a presence in the dark, a consciousness adrift, untethered from body and identity and purpose. I spoke aloud, and my voice was swallowed by the darkness, no echo, no reflection, nothing to indicate that I had made a sound. I tried again, louder, and still nothing. The Hulk was absorbing everything now, not just light but sound, sensation, thought. I was being unmade, dissolved piece by piece, and I could do nothing to stop it. I do not know how long I walked in the darkness. Time ceased to have meaning. I might have walked for minutes or hours or days. I felt hunger and thirst, but they were distant, abstract concepts, no longer tied to physical need. I felt fear, but it too was fading, replaced by a numbness that was almost comforting. I was letting go. I was releasing my grip on the things that defined me, and in that release, I found a kind of freedom. I collapsed eventually. My legs gave out, and I fell to the deck, my body too weak to continue. I lay there in the darkness, my breathing shallow, my heartbeat slow and irregular. I thought about the salvage clans, about the people I had known, about the life I had lived before the Hulk. I thought about the choices I had made, the paths I had taken, the moments that had led me here, and I realized that none of it mattered. The Hulk did not care about my history. It did not care about my regrets or my hopes or my dreams. It cared only that I was here, that I had become part of it, that I would remain part of it long after my body had ceased to function. I closed my eyes, though the darkness was the same either way. I thought about dying, about what it would feel like when my heart finally stopped, when my lungs drew their last breath, when consciousness slipped away and left only the void. I thought about whether there was anything beyond, whether the Emperor waited for souls like mine, whether redemption was possible for those who had lived and died in obscurity. I thought about all these things, and then I stopped thinking, because thought required energy I no longer had. The darkness pressed in. The Hulk breathed. And I lay still, waiting for the end, knowing it would come not as a dramatic climax but as a quiet fading, a gradual dissolution, a return to the nothingness from which I had emerged. But the end did not come. I woke. Or perhaps I had never slept. It was impossible to tell. My body ached. My throat was dry. My vision was still dark, but I could sense something different, a change in the air, a faint vibration in the deck that had not been there before. I sat up slowly, my muscles protesting, and I listened, and I heard it. A sound, faint, rhythmic, mechanical. Something was moving. Something was approaching. I felt along the floor until I found my las pistol. The charge indicator was dead, but I gripped it anyway, holding it like a talisman. I stood, swaying, and I turned toward the sound, though I could not see where it was coming from. The vibration grew stronger, the sound grew louder. And then, without warning, light flooded the corridor, harsh and blinding, and I threw my arm up to shield my eyes, stumbling backward. When my vision cleared, I saw it. A servitor, standing in the corridor, its ocular implants glowing red, its limbs twitching in that same slow, deliberate pattern I had seen before. But this one was different. This one was looking at me, its head turned, tracking my movement, and it raised one arm, pointing down the corridor behind it. And then it spoke, its voice a flat, emotionless monotone, the words distorted by vox corruption but still comprehensible. It said, "Follow." I stared at it, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing, what I was hearing. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to demand explanations, but my voice would not come. And so, I simply nodded, and the servitor turned and began to walk. And I followed, because I had no other choice, because after everything I had endured, the possibility of an answer, any answer, was too compelling to ignore. The servitor led me through corridors I had never seen, passages that were clean and well lit, functional in a way the rest of the hulk was not. We descended through hatchways and climbed through access shafts, and the servitor never looked back, never checked to see if I was still following, as if my compliance was assumed. And perhaps it was. Perhaps I was no longer capable of choosing otherwise. We entered a chamber at the end of a long passage, and the servitor stopped at the threshold, gesturing for me to proceed. I stepped inside, and the door sealed behind me, and I stood alone in a room that was empty, except for a single chair in the center and a cogitator terminal mounted on the wall. I approached the terminal, my hands trembling, and the screen flickered to life, displaying a single line of text. It read, "The Hulk does not release what it claims, but it offers this, witness." And then the screen changed, and I saw images. Footage from cameras I had never known existed, showing corridors I had walked, chambers I had explored, moments I had lived through, all recorded, all preserved. I saw myself crawling through wreckage. I saw myself eating scraps. I saw myself collapsing in exhaustion. I saw myself talking to the Hulk, pleading with it, cursing it, begging it. I saw every degradation, every failure, every moment of weakness. The Hulk had been watching. It had always been watching. The footage ended, and the screen went dark, and a new line of text appeared. It read, "You are not the first. You will not be the last. But you are remembered." And I understood then what the Hulk wanted. Not my death, not my suffering. It wanted my story. It wanted to record me, to add me to its archive, to preserve the memory of Merrick Dahl, not because I mattered, but because I was part of the collection, another specimen in its vast museum of the damned. The chair in the center of the room was an invitation. I could sit, I could rest. I could remain here, in this chamber, sustained by whatever mechanisms the Hulk employed, and I could live out whatever days remained to me in relative comfort. Or I could refuse. I could turn and leave and return to the corridors and the darkness and the slow erosion of body and mind. I looked at the chair, I looked at the door, and I made my choice. I turned away from the chair and walked to the door, and I pressed the control panel, and the door opened, and I stepped back into the corridor. The servitor was gone, the light was dimmer, but I kept walking, because walking was all I had left, because the Hulk might own my body and my future, but it did not own my will, not yet, and as long as I could move, I would refuse the comfort it offered. I would refuse to become a passive exhibit in its gallery of despair. The darkness returned, the hunger returned, the fear returned, but I walked. I walked until my legs could no longer carry me, and then I crawled, and when I could no longer crawl, I dragged myself forward, inch by inch, breath by breath, because this was who I was. This was all I had ever been, a scavenger who refused to be claimed, who refused to stop, who refused to surrender even when surrender was the only rational choice. And the Hulk let me. It did not stop me. It did not punish me. It simply watched, recording, preserving, adding my defiance to the archive alongside my weakness, cataloging every moment, every choice, every futile act of resistance. I do not know how much longer I will last, days, hours, minutes. But I will last as long as I can. I will walk until I cannot walk. I will crawl until I cannot crawl. And when I finally stop, when my body gives out and my consciousness fades, the Hulk will have my story, but it will not have my submission. Because that is what it means to be trapped inside a space Hulk. It is not the confinement that destroys you. It is not the hunger or the fear or the loneliness. It is the realization that you are being observed, catalogued, preserved, that your suffering has become entertainment for a consciousness so vast and so alien that it perceives you the way you might perceive a microbe under glass, interesting perhaps, but ultimately insignificant. And yet you continue, not because you believe you will escape, not because you hope for rescue, but because to stop would be to concede that the Hulk was right, that you were never more than a specimen, that your existence never mattered. So you walk, you endure, you resist. And in that resistance, however futile, however doomed, you find the last shred of humanity the Hulk has not yet claimed. And perhaps that is enough.